Ultimate Wolverine starts killing the X-Men, and it's amazing. Dude, this comic is so good. So we are back with the Ultimate Universe, because all you guys really seem to care about is the Ultimate Universe in Marvel and Absolute in DC. Everything else is just kind of, whatever. So this introduction with Ultimate Wolverine is phenomenal because it's kind of a blend between the People's Protectorate, Department X, and the Siberia force from the Soviet Union. And I'll explain what that means as we get further into it, because those are all groups and organizations that existed in Marvel. So one of the things that goes on here is that this kind of takes place separate from everything that we've seen so far, where you have like the Illuminati behind the scenes. We're kind of waiting for the Maker to return. Jonathan Hickman is writing a new event this year, coming out in the summer, I think, and hopefully it involves this. But this whole story takes place in Russia, and it largely just involves what it is that the Soviets doing. Specifically, what you end up doing is picking up near the border of Eurasia and Latveria. Now remember, Reed Richards was manipulated by the Maker and really kind of transformed into Doctor Doom. So Doctor Doom doesn't really rule Latveria in the Ultimate Universe the way that he does in the main Marvel Universe, but it makes no real difference here because this is now a haven for the mutant population. One thing to be aware of, yes, Marvel is writing the Ultimate X-Men with Peach Momoko, but the reception to it, as far as I understand it, has been kind of lukewarm. So I don't really know how long that's going to go on for, which is a shame because it's the comic that I love to read and just not talk about because, you know, I love that sometimes. But there's these rumors and things that go around when it comes to like the Winter Soldier, right? One of the guys says that he'd heard he was part of an experiment gone wrong in the North America Union, that one of the guys in the infantry said that he's pieced together from corpses of other soldiers who died in combat that Wolverine can't die. So it's one of these things where his kind of legend precedes him, so to speak, right? Stories get told about the nature of him, so much so that when he does something as innocuous as just standing up, the other soldiers are terrified, right? And they initially think he's going to kill him, but he's like, I got more important things to worry about. And then Marvel takes a page out of Captain America from the Winter Soldier where he jumps out of a plane with no parachute. And they're like, he doesn't have a chute, right? The only thing that we're missing here is Crossbones saying, yeah, he does that sometimes. But the cool thing is, like, when he shows up here, what you end up doing is following the story as it kind of bounces around a little bit, right? So initially there was some kind of a skirmish, presumably the mission that he was sent on. And then he turned out to be a survivor. He's ultimately hunted down by these guys and shot. And I think that's one of the coolest things about the nature of Ultimate Wolverine. He's not really depicted as Wolverine is depicted in the main Marvel Universe, where he's almost like this unstoppable force. And very rarely does anybody ever get the upper hand on him. Instead, this Ultimate Universe is much like the original in Marvel. It's a lot more grounded. It's a lot more tangible. So this depiction of Wolverine is kind of what you would expect. Really more in line with what you've seen from Hugh Jackman in the movies. He goes into a place, he does some stuff, he probably gets shot to pieces, maybe blown up, but his healing factor takes care of the rest, and he comes back out the other side. And so what you end up doing is picking up in almost this kind of camp, so to speak, right? Where he literally like crash lands down into this place. Now it is kind of nuts when he shows up here because it almost kind of seems to bounce back and forth, but then we end up figuring out he's actually here specifically for Mystique and for Nightcrawler. And there's a reason for that. And we'll talk about that here in a second because that's where Siberia Force and those little groups come into play. But he's been sent here to kill these guys. And of course, Nightcrawler here is not as powerful as he's going to be in Marvel Rivals because the developers don't know anything about him. So they just will probably give him insane levels of power like they did with Iron Fist. But the fact is, right, what you end up doing is picking up with kind of the experiment that led to him being created to a degree in the first place. Now, what's interesting about this is that we covered this with the quote-unquote origin video, which is really more of a backup feature to an existing comic. This, of course, gives us a lot more information. And one of the things that it reveals here is that we're seemingly, Peach Momoko is kind of writing some of the X-Men characters. The real meat and potatoes of the team just kind of operate out here and are effectively in hiding. But the nature of this is that this guy, right, Wolverine, as they talk about him, they say, this is the same specimen who survived an airstrike on an opposition compound outside Rasputingrad and a bullet at point blank range to the temple. He regenerated his whole body in record time and had strength enough to kill the soldier who shot him. And so initially, where you have Arkady Rasputin here, right, Omega Red, normally he and Wolverine are like the worst of enemies when it comes to the main Marvel Universe. In this reality, Omega Red is just kind of like, I dig this guy, right? I mean, it's one of the cool changes that they're making here in the Ultimate Universe, that Omega Red is just kind of like, I mean, this dude's pretty interesting. And so ultimately they kind of continue on with their conversation, right? Subject originates from the North American Union, like some of the other opposition forces, though it hasn't spoken since we brought it to Moscow. And so that's where you get Colossus chiming in here, right? What can we do with this? Now, one of the things that I love about the way they're depicting Colossus in this particular comic, he feels very similar to Age of Apocalypse Colossus. He's a lot more brutal. He's a lot more cutthroat, not nearly as kindly and caring as you would normally expect to see Cyclops behave in Marvel Comics. Because in the main Marvel Universe, he is, right? He's a very compassionate guy. He only kills when he really has to, that sort of thing. But again, the Doctor chimes in and says, we have attempted skeletal enhancement before, as you know, and that's where Colossus is yes, and it's routinely failed. We cannot permit another such failure. And so this again really kind of seems to lend credence to the idea that Wolverine is sort of this program, or part of this program, that's almost like an updated blend between Siberia Force and the People's Protectorate and these different, organizations that exist out there. So a little bit of history here in Marvel Comics, and you guys are going to love this, right? So most of you guys know here in the States, in the Marvel Universe, that we got the Avengers, right? They show up on the scene, they do all kinds of cool stuff. You have programs like Weapons Plus, which is basically a joint venture between the United States CIA and Canada's Department H to essentially create super soldiers in the aftermath of Captain America being believed to have been dead. Well, the idea to kind of expand on that in terms of what the Soviet Union was doing in the main Marvel Universe is that when Weapons Plus and Weapon X started to manifest in the States, the Soviets responded in kind. Specifically, they created Department X. Now, Department X was largely a KGB program, and that's what gave us like the Black Widows, right? The Red Room, different things like that. Wolverine was kind of part and parcel to it to a degree, insofar as he was a guy that helped them fight and helped them train on how to become better killers. I think he trained Black Widow's father. I'm not 100% sure about that, but he did have a hand in building the training regimen for the Red Room. Now, on top of that, you have the People's Protectorate and Siberia Force. Now, the People's Protectorate was basically a government-sanctioned superhero team. So for those of you guys who have been reading Marvel Comics for a really long time, think X Factor in the 1990s after the original end of the Louise and Walter Simonson run, right? So like 1993 running up until the relaunch of the X-Men when Multiple Man ended up leading X Factor and they became like a detective team, right, in the mid-2000s. But that goes into the idea of Siberia Force. Now, Siberia Force was a team that was brought together from the mutants who were left alive, which is to say the Soviet Union looked at the X-Men and mutants in the United States and realized how credible of a threat they could be to the Soviet Empire if they chose to turn against the Soviet government. So for the most part, they were all hunted down and killed. Those who were not killed were conscripted into service. Kind of a fun fact here, Colossus was supposed to be conscripted into Siberia Force, but Xavier showed up in time and rescued Colossus, and Peter went on to join the X-Men. So literally Xavier saved him from a fate worse than death, and most likely saved the X-Men from future calamity, because who knows what would have looked like if Colossus had been a bad guy. But the point is, right, all those little things were coming together in Marvel to kind of create this international superhero landscape to a degree. The Winter Guard is a combination of the People's Protectorate and Siberia Force merged into one group. But what you're seeing here is seemingly a combination of all those things, right? Siberia Force, People's Protectorate, Department X, Weapons Plus, all sort of merged together. Now, we don't really know the back end. We don't know what happened in North America that led to Wolverine becoming Wolverine. We know that Captain America is not there in the traditional sense. At least he was only recently discovered by Tony Stark and Doctor Doom, and he's been whisked off to the future. So the idea of Marvel using the original Ultimate Universe origin for Wolverine is highly unlikely here, right? If you don't know what that means, it's not a great big huge deal. It's just Wolverine became a super soldier around the same time that Captain America did. But the bigger point is they're kind of asking the question, like, what do we do, right? They say, like, this is all just kind of crazy and wild, but the response is, for now, yes. But what this specimen has that other specimen lack is simple. Instinct. He's a survivor. An example, we tried to administer a sedative 4 times. 4 times we lost the technician. This guy killed him each and every time. Wolverine was just kind of that almost mindless and somewhat feral, and you'll see why here in a little bit. And the response of Colossus, then he cannot be controlled. This specimen is useless. So a very cold and calculating Colossus compared to what we're used to. But the doctor chimes in and says, but I think you forget, it is not the only specimen that we have here. And the question is asked, are you talking about the telepath? And she says, for starters, yes. Now, either they're talking about Jean or they're talking about Xavier. We don't fully know yet, but the statement's made, once we have it under control, I do not think the opposition will be a problem much longer. And that is quite useful. So again, this is a really interesting piece of information, because what you do is you jump back or kind of jump forward to when Wolverine crash landed in this place and is attacking Nightcrawler and Mystique. And that's where Nightcrawler's like, I know this guy. Like, Raven, we need to get out of here as fast as we can. If we do not leave here, we are going to die. But at the end of the day, Mystique's just like fire, right? She ends up shooting the place up and trying to kill Wolverine. As you guys would expect, it doesn't work. And so all Nightcrawler can really do here is just read people their rights, because he knows everybody's going to die. And that's what happens. They all start to get massacred piece by piece. And Wolverine does not care who he kills. His job is to kill everybody. And so as Nightcrawler is delivering these rights to everyone, Mystique takes off. Now, of course, Wolverine chases after her, and then Colossus appears out of nowhere, right? Opposition rats are swarming all over this place. Wolverine sniffs her out immediately, realizes it's her, slashes her throat, and that's the end of that. So it's really wild, right? Just how hardcore this dude is. And he just walks away, leaving Mystique just bleeding to death. And so at that point, he finally catches up with Nightcrawler, and Nightcrawler's just kind of like, oh God. And that's when you switch over to the back end, right? With Colossus and these guys experimenting on him again. That Wolverine has finally been brought under control, right? They have him chained, that kind of thing. It's like precautions. Its mind is empty, ours for the molding. So again, they constantly refer to Wolverine as it. They never really refer to him as a human being in any meaningful way, but they say its allegiance will only be to the Eurasian Republic. And the response, yes, Colossus, its memories have been wiped completely. It will not even know its own name. But that instinct, its survival instinct, will remain. You will not find another specimen like it. Close, maybe, but this specimen is truly unique. Its past self is dead. Logan, it was once called, but no more. We have taken to calling it by a nickname it seemed fitting. Lived, died, and born again as we choose. It will be cold-blooded, relentless, and merciless. We call it our Winter Soldier. So again, very much building on the idea of Bucky Barnes, but you can see how the Ultimate Universe is pulling on all these threads from the main Marvel Universe, all these programs, these initiatives, things like that, and consolidating them all down. And it's fantastic. It's absolutely awesome the way that Marvel's doing this, right? And so ultimately, Nightcrawler kind of gives us this huge revelation. He's like, if you are who I think you are, and I know that you are who I think you are, I know it's you. I don't know what they've done to you, but this is not you. It's me, Kurt. Please, I beg of you, do not kill me. I do not wish to fight. But ultimately, Wolverine goes on the move. And Kurt does the only thing he can do. He says, I'm sorry, but do not let his tears trick you. He's not crying for Logan. He's crying for himself, because he knows the best he can do here is buy time, because he says, forgive me, but I do what I must. And he like starts teleporting around while shooting Wolverine at the same time. It's one of the reasons why Nightcrawler, if he's written correctly, is arguably one of the deadliest superheroes in the entirety of Marvel Comics. No doubt he's going to be ridiculously overpowered in Marvel Rivals, but he is wildly powerful. Being able to teleport, and he can teleport whatever he's touching, meaning he can teleport parts of people. It's how he killed Wade Wilson in Age of Apocalypse, by teleporting his head off. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that he can do in Marvel. But again, none of it matters, none of it works. Wolverine gets the upper hand and actually predicts where Nightcrawler is going to teleport and then catches him off guard. and then kills him. Now, a lot of that's likely due to the nature of Nightcrawler's teleportation, which is to say, when he jumps from one location to the next, he actually travels through a place called the Brimstone Dimension. And when that happens, he emerges with almost a kind of like charcoal burned smell to him. So if you can follow that scent, you know exactly where it is that he's going to go. And with someone whose senses are as acute as Wolverine's, it makes perfect sense that he would be able to track Nightcrawler's movements, figure out where he jumped to by where he's about to emerge, and then react just in time, fast enough to kill him. And so that's where Nightcrawler is like, I'm sorry. He says, if you're in there, my friend, I pray that you have the strength. I'm sorry that we were not quick enough. We came back for you. We would always come back for you. And Nightcrawler essentially dies. And so what this seems to put forward here is that Wolverine was a part of the mutant resistance in Eurasia. And it's one of the big things that Marvel's kind of talked about behind the scenes, that yes, you have the Hulk and the Illuminati and all those guys that kind of rule the world in secret, but there are pockets of resistance all over the world. A lot of those resistance forces are fighting a war of attrition, right? It's just endless forces that they're always going against. They never really have a chance to win, and that's it. But the traditional X-Men, or what you and I would call the X-Men, kind of seem to be operating as almost a disbanded resistance force that exists out there. And so Wolverine, of course, catching up to these guys, takes these guys out. But it seems like he was one of them at one point in time. And that's when you jump back to the mental conditioning. Again, all of this kind of existing as a way to brainwash him. And they show him Nightcrawler and Mystique, and they say, these are your targets. They are bad guys, right? The difference is we know how to win. Look at these two, escaped 2 years ago from the East Berlin camp. They could have been part of the solution like you, part of history, given themselves their bodies, their abilities for the Republic. Instead, they're running away, but not you. You are a fighter. And so again, it's mental conditioning within the Soviet Empire. But the way this ends is that there almost kind of seems a glimpse, or maybe a little bit of a tease, that Wolverine is slowly starting to figure himself out. And that's one of the big differences between someone like Bucky Barnes and somebody like Wolverine. Mental conditioning for Logan can be a difficult thing to do. The reality here is that when it came to Logan's mind being so screwed up, a lot of that wasn't really so much the fact that his memories were all being wiped away and systematically replaced. They were. But the reality of what was going on was that he had so many memories in his head, he didn't know which ones were true and which ones were not. Now, over the years, that's waxed and waned. Marvel's written stories where he lost his memories entirely, right? So he doesn't remember anything about his actual past, which really seems to be the definitive explanation for Marvel, especially given the aftermath of House of M. Scarlet Witch took away everybody's powers, and one of the benefits, if you want to call it that, for Wolverine is he remembered his entire history. But the fact is, right, I mean, it's one of these things with his character, we don't know whether he truly remembers. It may simply just be the mental conditioning is too strong, and there's no way for it to be overcome. We are back with Ultimate Wolverine, and seemingly how it was that the Maker was responsible for his creation, or at the very least, set him on the path to the person that he is today. Now, because of the fact that it's been a while, about a month or so since we covered the last issue of this, I will provide some context here in a minute. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to open this up where it talks about the Professor, because this is really cool. And I'll talk about what that means here in a minute. But the Professor says, my proposed weapons project has been postponed once again, pending further analysis. Still, our initial findings have yielded results that may be useful, though our first adamantium-infused subject, Weapon Alpha, died within minutes of the procedure. My small but devoted staff and I discovered a remarkable number of individuals with abilities beyond our own living among us in secret. These Homo superior individuals, our potential subjects. Some of these individuals have the ability to heal themselves. Others have a supernaturally heightened agility. We do not know their full potential, but with the approval from presumably the Department of Defense, they would be able to figure it out. But his statement is interrupted by the arrival of the Maker. Now, a little bit of a refresher here, right? For those of you guys who were either jumping on board for the first time or essentially need one, while we do have a whole playlist for all of this, which will give you all the little tidbits, the long and short of it is that the Maker comes from the original Ultimate Universe, Earth 1610. The issue with this is that that reality was destroyed during the incursions. So he's been modifying this reality to turn it into the one that he came from. And that means going through the timeline and making changes. This is one of the changes that he made. He seemingly arrived on the doorstep of Professor Truett Hudson, or Abraham Cornelius, depending on what name you want to call him. And what's kind of wild here is that Professor doesn't know who the Maker is. He's never seen him before. It makes sense. The Maker comes from a different reality, so the two of them never would have met. But in the conversation between them, the Maker kind of reveals what his motivation is here, right? He's like, I am a man in search of a better world. And what the Professor says, there is no perfect world. The response of the Maker is, a better world, Professor, a better one. And so because of the fact that the Professor doesn't know who he is, he's like, how did you get in here? I've never seen you before, right? Like, what in the world is going on? What's your clearance? The Maker kills him on the spot. And I will say, one of the things that I think is interesting about the Maker is how he uses his powers. I mean, sure, it's for nefarious purposes, but the way that he kills the Professor is very reminiscent of like the way the T-1000 killed in Terminator 2. But again, with the Professor dead, the Maker kind of muses to himself and he says, you see, Professor, I am making this a better world. And a better world is one that you're not in. And so with the Professor dead, he torches the building and wipes out all the Professor's research. Now, why does this matter? Okay, so let's provide some context to all of this. So one of the things to keep in mind, while we don't really have to go in depth into the Maker, we've talked about him plenty over the course of the time that we've been covering the new Ultimate Universe, the long and short is that he comes from a reality that doesn't exist anymore, but he wants to turn this reality into that reality. So that's why he was traveling around the time stream making changes. Now, he was defeated at the end of the new Ultimate Universe miniseries created by Jonathan Hickman, but his defeat was not his death. And so the big event that we're all kind of waiting on will happen in about a year and a half, when the Maker re-emerges and then presumably launches an attack against the entirety of the Earth. We don't really know what he's going to do because we don't know what he's been doing. He's just literally in a giant city, right, encased and locked away. But the fact is, right, that in this whole thing, when you talk about Professor Truett Hudson, that's being pulled from the main Marvel Universe. Because in the main Marvel Universe, when it comes to Hudson, a lot of you guys know him as Abraham Cornelius, the guy that gave Wolverine his adamantium as part of Weapon X. But Truett Hudson has been a part of that project for much longer. In fact, Truett Hudson discovered the journals of Nathaniel Essex during World War II, right, Mr. Sinister, because Sinister had been experimenting on mutants in German camps during World War II. When Hudson discovered these journals, he realized that mutants were not conjecture and they were not rumor. They were real. And so he started building Weapons Plus. Ultimately, that culminated in Weapon X, again, Wolverine. But Wolverine being brought in was more about him being part of a Black Ops wet work team called Team X, which was originally formed by Weapons Plus and then lent out to the United States CIA to carry out various missions during the Cold War in the 60s. But what ended up happening is that because Team X proved to be so capable, it was decided by Weapons Plus that they would be the test subject for their 10th project, Weapon X. Hence how Wolverine got his adamantium. But again, in the original Ultimate Universe, some elements are also being borrowed here. It's really more symbolic and metaphorical than anything else. But in the original Ultimate Universe for Earth 1610, the origin of Wolverine was starkly different from the one we just talked about from the main Marvel Universe, which is to say that Nick Fury, right, Samuel Jackson Nick Fury, essentially, and James Howlett Wolverine, they were actually the original super soldiers before Steve Rogers ever became Captain America. It was really more Nick Fury than James, that Nick Fury was given a primitive version of the super soldier serum and basically broke himself and a few prisoners out of their cells and then took off underground, never to really be seen or heard from again until he reemerged, and then ultimately became director of S.H.I.E.L.D. But for James, he was whisked away to a Canadian black site, and it was in the experiments being conducted on him that humanity learned about the mutant gene. They activated it, he got a healing factor, adamantium was bonded to his skeleton. Coincidentally enough, the activation process was synthesized, and that's how mutants got their powers within the original Ultimate Universe. That was actually covered in a story called Ultimate Origins, I think. No, I think it was Ultimatum. I can't remember off the top of my head which story it was, but it was a Magneto story, essentially. And so again, these origins being completely different, you can see the symbolism and the metaphor being pulled from like the original Ultimate Universe as far as what Wolverine stands for here. What's also interesting and what we know from the last video that we covered is that because the Professor never brought in Wolverine and turned him into the character that we know and love with adamantium bonded to his skeleton, his life just sort of went on. Now we know the X-Men don't exist, that instead what ended up happening is that Colossus, Omega Red and Colossus' sister Illyana Rasputin took over Eurasia, right? Just literally ruling that section of the world with an iron fist. They were very tyrannical. And so Wolverine actually ended up joining what you and I might loosely call the X-Men, which was kind of a combination of humans and mutants fighting together in order to free Eurasia from the control of Colossus, Omega Red, and Magik. But that's about as far as we know, right? At some point, he was captured by Eurasia and transformed into the Winter Soldier, and presumably adamantium was bonded to his skeleton. But even then, we're not entirely sure. All we really know is, at least from the last video, is that Nightcrawler and Mystique and those guys constantly tried to rescue Wolverine, and they were never successful, which culminated in him being tasked after brainwashing with tracking him down, and then he killed them all, right? So again, it's kind of nuts here, but that's where you transition into the rest of the story, which is equally interesting and kind of gives us some insight into what all's going on here. That what this does is that in Eurasia, it picks up with a handful of soldiers walking through the woods. And as that happens, one of them is killed by Wolverine, again, kind of renamed to the Winter Soldier. And that's when you switch over to Illyana, Colossus, and Omega Red. And what they've done here is they've brought in Dr. Prostovich. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce this name in Russian, but still, she is essentially the person in charge of what's called Directorate X, which is basically, as we mentioned in the previous video, this comic's version of Department X, the program that created like the Black Widows and all that kind of stuff, but also the program that created the Winter Soldier, except this time it's Wolverine instead of Bucky. And one of the things that's talked about here, and one of the concerns that the three have, is that Wolverine still maintains his memories. Now, the argument from Dr. Prostovich is like, no, he gets brainwashed, his memories, like he may have memories, but he doesn't know what's real and what's not. But those memories should be wiped away, right? The only memories he has are the ones we give him. That keeps him completely and totally subservient to us. And so the question of Illyana is that true though? Right? It's what you claim, but is that true? Because she says, how can you be so sure? We are not the only ones with telepaths at our disposal. Perhaps the project should be terminated. And the response of Prostovich is like, terminated? Like, what are you even talking about? Like, we've sent him on 4 missions already, 4 successful missions. The opposition is reeling, leaders. He eliminated several top operatives last month on our western border alone, right? Again, referring to the death of Nightcrawler and Mystique. That also kind of refers to the idea that these stories do follow in real time because that happened last month. But the response of Illyana is, successful missions are a dime a dozen, just like your other creations. And that's where Prostovich is kind of flabbergasted here, right? She's like, I am tasked with certain directives and I accomplish them without fail. I fail to understand why I'm defending myself. And that's where, again, Illyana hits on and says, he has no memories. You say this, you have said this time and again, but how do you explain what happens when your little Winter Soldier sleeps? And where Prostovich doesn't really say anything, Illyana says, okay, well, if you didn't think that we knew, then perhaps it's time that we check in on your little project to see for ourselves how well he's doing. And so when they get there, he's basically in his regenerative state, right? Just kind of recovering. But again, brain signals, brain patterns, grunts that he's making, different things like that. The response of Prostovich is, as with any normal being, this is a regenerative cycle, restorative. He's dreaming here. That's why he is responding to things the way he is. He's not reliving old memories or anything like that. And so she says, would I prefer him to be inert? Yes, of course. But this is not an exact science. It takes time and testing. And she says, he is mostly docile while awake. He obeys. And so that's where Colossus is like, remove the specimen. I want to inspect it myself. And I will say this, son. I know Colossus is a good guy. He's a gentle giant and, speak softly and carry a big stick. And that dude carries one hell of a stick. But I love villainous Colossus. I don't know why, but I love Colossus as a bad guy. He's amazing. Because literally when Wolverine is pulled out of this tank, that the response of Prostovich is like, look, you shouldn't rip him out of this. Just kind of let him stay in stasis. And the response of Colossus is, do not underestimate how disposable you are, Doctor. Remove the specimen now. And that's exactly what happens. And she basically issues a command to him, and he steps out of the containment vessel. And in turn, she says he responds to verbal commands when prefaced with designation. Otherwise, he may react, let's say, poorly, maybe out of some kind of instinct or something along those lines. But Colossus doesn't care at all. He says, Dr. Prostovich, do not dictate how I may interact with my own property. I know how to handle creatures like this. It is not with verbal commands. Creatures like this, men like this, they know violence. They respect it. Because unlike you, men like this know there is no such thing as safe. Every second of existence, there is someone or something trying to take from you. And men like this, they know that men like me stand in their way. If you don't crush them, if you do not show them your power, your true power, they will resist. It is inevitable, Doctor. After all, he has done so before. So we will reinforce the lesson. The Winter Soldier's rightful place is under our heel. And just like throws him, right? But again, because he's brainwashed here and because he's basically being controlled, he's not resisting. And so Colossus says, I think we should like to see the Winter Soldier in action. No more reports. We want to see him. And that's where both Arcady, right, Omega Red, and Illyana are like, yes, give us a test, give us something, some kind of a scenario, a field scenario. We will monitor it and we will decide whether or not this project will continue on. And so ultimately they leave. Now there is this kind of gentle moment between the professor, or at least the doctor, and Wolverine, where she's like, thank God they're gone. What a mess. Come, Winter Soldier, you have a new mission ahead of you. So she seems to genuinely care for him, right? And potentially there may be some kind of romance blossoming between the two of them. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, you guys know, right? Like Wolverine's got a thing for damaged goods. So I don't know. I mean, she's probably just as screwed up as he is. But at the end of the day, this is where you jump back to that whole scenario with those soldiers in the field, because they've been sent out there for that purpose. Now, initially, they don't know, or at least not everybody knows. One of them figures it out pretty fast, but there's this really cool moment where they're walking through after the death of their teammate, and it's just kind of like, all right, so this guy's supposed to be opposition, right? But like, I got a glimpse of him. He doesn't look like opposition, right? So like, what in the world is going on here? And so it's really interesting because one of the guys says, I know it sounds silly, but my babushka told stories when I was little of a creature in the woods, Leshy, the forest spirit, which I don't know if that exists, but if it does, that sounds awesome. Leshy, the forest spirit? This sounds like a teddy bear that would kill you, right? The woodland critters from South Park. But the whole idea is that if you disturb the forest, then Leshy will come for you. And another guy says, I saw it too, only for a second. It was running like an animal on all fours, like a demon. And that's where they're like, what are we even dealing with here? Now, this is one of the things that's really cool about this, because it's almost very Batman-esque in terms of how these guys are reacting. In the absence of knowing what's truly going on, their imaginations run away with them. And suddenly things that would otherwise be completely irrational and nonsensical, like Leshy the forest spirit, or some kind of a demon, because again, the Ultimate Universe is a far more grounded reality, those become their reality because it's the only way they can make sense of this situation. But the guy who's leading the group is like, look guys, it's not some demon or some forest spirit, right? It's not the woodland critters and it's not a nymph. This is the Winter Soldier. Now, at that point, everybody starts getting super serious because they're just like, I mean, that's a myth, right? Like, I mean, the Winter Soldier doesn't exist. Like, that's nonsense, right? There's no such thing as the Winter Soldier. And that's where he asks, like, did a myth just slice Kamarov's face off? If that's true, myths are getting pretty dangerous these days. And he says, but I thought like it wasn't like that. The rumors say that the Winter Soldier was one of our guys, a tool of the Eurasian Republic's leadership. And that's where the leader's like, perhaps he is. And so the question is asked, why is he hunting us? And that's where the leader chimes in and says, perhaps you should be asking why we're hunting him. If he is one of us, then the only reason for us to be here is simple. We're practice. And that's why it's like, they're filming us? Like, why in the world are they filming us? Like, it doesn't make any sense that they would film us. But while they're just kind of, bantering back and forth and trying to get the lay of the land and understand what's going on, Wolverine's walking right up behind him, right? Like the Winter Soldier is coming for them. And so at that point, it's like, this guy's like, remember comrades, it's him or it's us. And if it's us, we had better put on a good show. And they have to, right? Because the Winter Soldier rides tonight, and tonight, he rides for you because he immediately comes to these guys and takes them out in one fell swoop, literally cuts their heads off and just carries them with him. Then he gets to the camera where he's being watched by like Arcady and Colossus and Ileana. He pops his claws and destroys the camera. And so yes, while this does show that it is him following orders, seemingly the Doctor's the only one that really picks up on what's going on here. That I wouldn't go so far as to say that Wolverine has full control of his faculties, but he is resisting and he does understand what's going on here. He's not a mindless beast, which begs the question, will the time come when he launches the full attack against Colossus and Omega Red and Magik? And if that time comes, what does that fight look like? Because son, I'll tell you right now, man, it sounds like it would be amazing. Now, before we get to Saber-tooth, there is something that we have to discuss. Otherwise, this is going to be lost. So technically, we didn't cover issue number 4. There really wasn't enough to justify making a whole video. The big takeaway from the 4th issue is that when it comes to controlling Wolverine in this new Ultimate Universe, that Eurasia, basically the Soviet Union and a few different other countries, all led by like Colossus and those guys, who were villains, in this particular instance, that they have 3 measures of control. The first one is essentially computer chips in his brain, right, that allow them to control him to some degree. The second one is mental reconditioning, which is what most people are familiar with, right, adjusting his memories, different things like that. The third one is telepathic manipulation, which actually comes from Jean Grey. Now, we only saw her in the 4th issue strung up in some giant, orb or something like that, and so seemingly she's sedated and she's used for Eurasia's own ends. So it's not Jean as you traditionally know her. But that brings us into this comic. The reason being because Saber-tooth is not the traditional villain that you're used to. Instead, he's essentially a member of the mutant underground railroad. And in fact, he runs a bar right out in Rasputingrad, the Eurasian Republic, because again, Colossus, Peter Rasputin, is a villain and named the entire city after himself, which is kind of crazy. But what ends up happening is that after the regular people in the bar leave, that Saber-tooth says, hey, you can come out now. And we're met by Artie and Leech. Now, despite what you may think, if you're familiar with the character of Leech, he is going to be important in the story. Artie is going to be way more important, probably in the future, of the Winter Soldier Ultimate Wolverine story. And it's really cool. I'll explain why here in a little while. But one of the things that Saber-tooth tells them is that the driver will be here soon in order to pick them up and to basically get them out. And he says, I took the liberty of making you food. I recommend that you guys eat up. It'll be a long ride, no stops, not until you're across the border. But this should last you guys. Hearty soup. Good for the soul, they say, but they also say a lot of things. Now, I don't necessarily know if I would eat anything that Saber-tooth made for me, but hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. But there is a little bit of a kind of backstory here. We don't really get the full details, but Saber-tooth basically talks about how there was an effort made to not just rescue them, but to rescue a few other people. Now, that is one of the important things to specify here in the Ultimate Wolverine comic. While you do have Ultimate X-Men from Peach Momoko, that doesn't really focus on the X-Men the way you would traditionally expect when it comes to this whole new Ultimate Universe line. What the other half of the story is telling us in the Ultimate Wolverine line is that, in effect, yes, mutants have existed in Eurasia, and they were basically rounded up and they were captured, they were executed, or they were forced into service for the Eurasian country itself. Now, this is actually borrowed directly from Marvel Comics in their main Marvel universe, and a lot of people don't know this, but there is a group called Siberia Force, or Cyber Force, as some people call it. The idea is that while the People's Protectorate, and even before that, right, the Soviet Supers, or Soviet Super Soldiers, I can't remember what their name was, while they were basically like the Avengers or precursors to the Avengers in the Soviet Union, Siberia Force was composed of mutants who had basically gone underground. They were rounded up by the Soviet government, and again, either they were executed or they were forced into service for the Soviet government. That's where Siberia Force came from. Now, eventually, Siberia Force and People's Protectorate merge, and that gives you the Winter Guard, which is definitively Russia's version of the Avengers. But again, it's one of these instances where Marvel is kind of pulling from their main Marvel universe throughout various stories that have been told over the years and rolling them into this particular story. So it's cool the way this whole thing works. And so in essence, mutants are being held in various camps around Eurasia, right, under the control of Peter Rasputin, his sister Magik, Omega Red, and a few other people. And we don't really know exactly what they're doing, potentially just either killing them or using them for their own ends. But again, there are efforts made to smuggle them out. And that's one of the things we learned about Wolverine. Nightcrawler and a few other people had been consistently trying to rescue him, and they were never successful in doing so. Then he's sent on a mission to kill them, and he successfully does. So again, there's this whole backstory that we haven't quite gotten yet for his character, and I'm excited to see what happens when we do. But one of the things that goes on is Saber-tooth talks to Artie and Leech about the idea of telling them some old stories, right? Some old war stories, which always seem kind of exciting. And he's like, we'll finish that here in a second. Just let me take out the trash. Now, when he gets out there, he sees a plane flying overhead. And right off the bat, something seems amiss because he immediately comes running in. And one of the things that we learn that goes on here is that in an effort to find mutants that are either being smuggled out of the country, mutants that are operating underground, that are sneaking around, that kind of thing, that Eurasia runs these air reconnaissance missions where they literally use things like AWACS and satellites and whatnot in order to figure out what mutants are out there and to figure out ways to capture them if they cannot easily be dealt with by foot soldiers and things like that. And so when Saber-tooth comes running back in, he literally tells them, like, you guys need to go back downstairs. I promise it's only going to be a temporary thing. We'll bring you guys back out. Now, there is a knock at the door, and when he opens the door, he gets outside. There's nobody there except for just some homeless guy wandering along the road talking about how they're closed. But then once he gets back inside the building, he finds Wolverine. Now, here's the cool thing here, right? Again, Saber-tooth isn't really a villain the way that you're used to. And when he sees Wolverine's there and really smells the fact that he's there, he's like, so the rumors are true. You're back from the dead, but something's off. Right? Like something about you has changed. It smells almost rotten, that maybe you really are dead. But then he kind of muses and he's like, no, you're not really dead, but you're not yourself. And that's where Wolverine pops his claws and Saber-tooth says, yeah, you're not yourself at all. Like, I know Logan, and I know that he would not be so stupid as to try to take me on in a head-on fight. You're not him. You may look like him, but you're an empty vessel, right? Something with you is wrong. Now, this is so cool. It's one of the coolest elements because that is true. Very rarely would you see Saber-tooth or Wolverine just jump into a headlong fight with one another. They would try to ambush the other, take the other person by surprise, different things like that. And that's why Saber-tooth says butchers, right? They messed with your brain, didn't they? They took their little fingers and their tools and they poked and pulled just like they did. And before he can finish that sentence, Wolverine cuts his arm off. So, what it also looks like Marvel's doing here is borrowing from Enemy of the State. Now, Enemy of the State was a really cool story in the main Marvel Universe. There is a what-if version where Wolverine basically kills the Marvel Universe, but Enemy of the State was this story where Hydra and the Hand were working together. They were taking heroes and they were brainwashing them and turning them into agents of Hydra. And because the Hand can resurrect people from the dead, whenever they were killed, the Hand would just bring them back. That's specifically is what was going on with Wolverine. He captured Moon Knight and a few other people. It was a really cool story, but what it seems like here is, again, Eurasia is kidnapping mutants and basically brainwashing them and turning them to their side. Potentially, he's even talking about Jean Grey. But again, because he has a healing factor with his arm basically missing, his arm just regrows. And so what he says is like, I don't know why they have you in a mask, but I am going to rip it off and I am going to find out. And at that point, you jump to a flashback between Wolverine and Saber-tooth, where Wolverine says, like, if they ever capture me, right? Now, initially, Saber-tooth is like, no, that's never going to happen, right? You don't need to worry about that. But the response of Wolverine is, no. If it happens, right, like I'm being 100% serious here. If it happens, I don't want to become one of their puppets. So you have to promise me, if I'm taken, you will kill me. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. Again, context clues, right? They have this almost X branding on their shoulders, and it's not really the X-Men the way we're traditionally used to, but it is something akin to it. But the statement, I don't want to become one of their puppets, seemingly Eurasia has been doing this for quite some time. And that's why I say, man, this is so cool. And I'm so excited to find out what the backstory behind this whole thing is. But that's where Saber-tooth says, man, that's a tall order coming from a guy with a healing factor that keeps death at arm's length. But the response of Wolverine, I know it, right? We both have it. But even still, I want you to promise me that you will find a way. make it happen and make it permanent. Now, of course, as you can probably suspect, the Muramasa blade doesn't exist in the Ultimate Universe, right? The sword that can nullify Wolverine's healing factor due to a portion of his soul being put in it, and then in turn will kill Wolverine. That doesn't exist here, right? So they have to find some other way to do this. And that's why during this fight between Saber-tooth and Wolverine, Wolverine kind of continues on with this bit of a monologue when they were having that conversation. And he says, we know what they make us do to the folks that we fought side by side with, died with. And he says, I'm not going to walk away from this fire until I know I have your word, that I've been fighting with you long enough. I know you're good for it. You're bonded to your word, and I want to know that you will do it. And the response of Saber-tooth, okay, well, if you want, then it's a deal. I will do it. But we both know that's not going to happen. And that's why this fight between the two is a great throwback, and it's a knockdown drag out because it is intense. I mean, literally stabbing each other, slashing each other, tearing each other to bits. And so finally, Saber-tooth manages to get his hands on the mask of Wolverine. And he literally says, if I'm going to kill you, I'm going to look into your face when I do it, and tears the mask off of his face. Now, this is where you end up finding out he basically looks like feral Wolverine, right? It's one of the coolest aspects of his character. So feral Wolverine was a version of Wolverine from the aftermath of the Fatal Attraction storyline. When Magneto ripped the adamantium out of its body, Wolverine just takes off into the woods. It's actually the first time you learn in Marvel Comics that he has bone claws, and they're not just a product of the adamantium bonding process. He also lost his nose. But literally, he becomes feral, and he looks almost exactly like this. And in fact, this version of Wolverine is effectively a feral Wolverine, right? Like any semblance of self-control, any semblance of identity is gone. He has been reprogrammed to be a killing machine. Nothing more, nothing less. He even seems to go so far as to bite the tongue of Saber-tooth and like rip it out of his mouth, right through his throat. It's kind of crazy. But in the midst of all of that, when Saber-tooth hits the ground, while his healing factor starts to kick in, the door busts open. And initially, we don't know who it is that shows up here, but then she brandishes these darts that come firing out of her wrists. It's Black Widow. It's the Ultimate Universe version of Black Widow. And I never thought we would actually see her character, but it's amazing because at that point she starts firing all these darts on Wolverine, and it's enough to knock him out. And at that point she opens the trap door where the kids are, and she was like, so here's your ride. I'm the person that's supposed to be giving you a ride. And the response to Saber-tooth is, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like, I mean, I don't get it. Why is he out like that, right? His healing factor is not kicking in. And Leech just stands up and is like, that's me. And that's one of the best things about his character. Now, of course, when I initially told you guys that Leech was in this comic, those of you guys who know his character know right off the bat, okay, so obviously this is how they're going to defeat Ultimate Wolverine, even if only in the interim. Of course, as some of you guys may not know, Leech has the ability to nullify the powers of other people, up to and including reality warpers, right? We saw him nullify the powers of Absalom Mercator, a guy who can manipulate matter on the atomic and subatomic level. And so the other person here is Artie. And the reason why I say Artie is so important here is because Artie has what is in effect telepathic projection. So quite literally, he can take the thoughts of other people and project them in the form of essentially holograms for the world to see. He is an invaluable resource here because he can enter into the mind of Wolverine and show everyone how Wolverine sees the world. With that kind of tool at their disposal, they can better understand his brainwashing and potentially even overcome it. Not only that, because of all the things that Wolverine's seen, right? Everything that he's witnessed. Of course, they'll see the various members of the X-Men that he's killed, but they'll also get the inner workings, the role of Colossus and all that kind of stuff. It's cool, right? There's so many opportunities here. In effect, Wolverine has just become the only real way for Saber-tooth and the mutant underground to take out the ruling class in Eurasia. And that's why Saber-tooth says, you guys aren't going anywhere alone. I'm 100% going with you. So this picks up with a really cool monologue. It's one of the things I love about Ultimate Wolverine, because what we get here is it says, I wear the chains I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? That's Dickens' friend, Charles Dickens. It's been in my mind these last few moments, as have you. And so you initially pick up in this kind of cage that Wolverine's confined in, but one of the things to remember, in the last video that we did, he was effectively rescued by Saber-tooth. So the question becomes, where is he now? Because this monologue continues. Your shackles are loose, but you are far from free. You still bear the chains of oppression. I wore them all my life. They rattled inside of my skull. You have these chains too, Logan. They confuse you, haunt you, control you. I know this too. We were many. We were legion. But now we are one. I am free, unburdened as you will be. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is Legion that appears here. Now, for those of you guys who don't really know about his character, and I don't know anybody who doesn't know about his character, but Legion in the main Marvel Universe, totally different from the Ultimate Universe, he has hundreds, if not potentially thousands of personalities, each one with a power. Sometimes these powers are duplicates, other times they are wholly unique. The Origamists, for example, can bend reality. Susan and Sunshine can manipulate emotions. We don't really know anything about this Ultimate version of Legion, but one of the things that's been hypothesized in Marvel is that if Legion were to ever attain a place where he was able to control all of his personality's powers without the drawback of those personalities having to take over in order for those powers to be used, that Legion would become God, right? It would be insane how powerful he was. He would operate on a universal and potentially even multiversal scale. That last part's more conjecture by me, full transparency. But he continues on here, right? Why don't you remember that name? You are not a Winter Soldier, yet you answer its call. You are not a specimen or a weapon, yet you allow yourself to be treated and wielded as one. You, my friend, are a prisoner because you allow yourself to be. You need to fight, Logan, not for anyone but yourself. You need to see yourself as I see you, lost but not forgotten, and know what I know, that in here we are not alone. I hear voices, Logan, voices from an unknown source. Though they grow weaker, they are losing their grasp. They whisper of a maker. In a way, I suppose he was. In fact, he was both to me, maker and unmaker. It was he who freed me from my prison, my physical body. Yet he did not make me whole. That came later. Now, when Legion says that came later, there's an important thing to know here. Legion was at one point David Haller, as you would expect based on Marvel's main Marvel Universe. But David's physical body was destroyed in a landslide. And so what ended up happening is seemingly he kept himself alive by transferring his consciousness into computer code. And that in doing that, it kind of fractured, for lack of a better word. And that's how you bring in the idea of like multiple personalities, multiple parts of a single code, each one vying for authority, power, control, whatever phrase you want to use to describe what was happening. Eventually, Beast stumbled upon it, and when that happened, he actually inspected the code and started having a conversation with it, and that's when he learned the nature of Legion. So what's actually going on here, maybe a little bit of a spoiler for the end of the video, that what Legion is doing is by operating in a computer code, he is the way in which these people, like Wolverine, are brought back. That by operating inside of a computer system of sorts, he can fix their minds. But the big issue with this is that Hank McCoy does not know, is Legion truly on their side, or does he appear to be on their side? Because Legion's entire code was literally hacked from the Eurasian Republic, from Colossus and Illyana and Omega Red. And so the indication seems to be here that the Maker actually helped Legion control all of his personalities and the powers that come with them. So again, it's exciting to see what he ends up becoming, because it continues on here. Your forgotten friends, they found me, brought me back from the ethereal plane, and now, in turn, I am helping you in the same way. The others, the Whispers say, they were truly your makers, and are more than that. They were your masters, and you their tool. As a tool, they used you, and they certainly will never let you go. Now, this is an important thing to keep in mind here. In Ultimate Wolverine, Colossus, Omega Red, Colossus' sister Illyana Rasputin, they're not superheroes. Well, I guess Omega Red never really was, but they're not good guys, right? They aren't people fighting on behalf of like the X-Men or anything like that. Events transpired that we don't fully know what they are that basically led to them becoming villains. Now again, we don't know what happened. It'll be exciting to find out when it does, but that's why you see them as manipulators of Wolverine, the ones controlling him, the ones who turned him into the Winter Soldier. Because Legion continues on here and he says, that is why you must fight, Logan. Use their own tool against them. Break free from your chains and fight. They wounded you, tortured you, stole your very life from you, but you were not fortunate enough to be greeted with the sweet, soft caress of death's kiss. They took your memories, they took your soul. You were always a killer, and they knew that. They knew, and they exploited it, exploited you. But you are in control. Take it back, break through, break free. You are Logan. You know this. Feel it again. Feel it in your bones. They've tried to take those from you. They've bonded your bones with an indestructible metal, a procedure they stole from a dead scientist from another land, just another upgrade for their tool. But you are not theirs. You never were. And that's one of the other cool elements too. Keep in mind, the whole adamantium bonding process, that was developed in the States. It was stolen by Colossus and Magik and Omega Red and all those guys operating in Eurasia under all these various Soviet territories, essentially, and that's how you got Winter Soldier. But again, Legion continues, and he says, and that is why you fight. They are powerful, Logan, formidable foes, it's true, but you are a crack in their armor. See it, know it, use it. Take the chains they wrapped you with, that they held you captive with, and use them. Master them as they mastered you. But there is one still, the one within you, always, the one who is neither master nor mastered, your greatest enemy, the one who knows your every move, your every secret. This one looks like you, acts like you, and smells like you, even thinks like you. But Logan, you must see, and you must know this one is not you. It will never be you. Do you hear me, Logan? You must fight. Do you hear me? Now, this is an incredibly important segment here, because what's going on is Logan's not physically fighting Magik or Colossus or Omega Red. It's really, again, kind of a symbolism of what he's experiencing. You guys probably figured that out by now. But what matters about all this is that Logan's biggest enemy is himself, as is usually the case with us as people, right? Negative self-talk, things like that. Those are the things that we contend with on a daily basis. In this instance, it's Logan's darker side, the part of him that wants to give in, right? That kind of wants to be the Winter Soldier, to kill mercilessly. And so once he wakes up, he actually wakes up to all these X-Men who were here. And we've long since wondered where they were, right? Again, Ultimate X-Men focuses more on what's basically the New Mutants. Ultimate Wolverine focuses on what remains of what we would call the X-Men, but they're bootstrapped, right? They're running on a shoestring budget. You've got guys like Red Guardian, you've got Abigail Brand, you have Forge, you have Gambit, but this is not an organized group that we're familiar with. It's a pretty motley crew. And so the question is asked here, right, by Forge, back to the opposition. And Abigail Brand just says, like, it's a lot to take in, we know, but do you remember, Logan, we need to know that you are not a bad guy. I think it is also important to specify here, this may not actually be Abigail Brand. It's entirely possible that it's Polaris. On looks alone, honestly, it could go either way, because they do look very similar. But Forge asked the question, do you remember who you are? And the response of Wolverine, I'm the best there is at what I do. And so at that point, he pops his claws. Now here's the kicker to all of this. We don't fully know what's going on here. We don't fully know if he is the version of himself that is the Winter Soldier, and that he's kind of playing possum, right? Kind of luring the X-Men in. Oh, I'm the best there is at what I do. You guys can trust me. And then attacks everyone. Because what's being illustrated here with them asking these questions is they don't know. They don't have an answer. It's one of the things to remember that Colossus and those guys, they have Jean Grey and the mind of Charles Xavier. So the telepaths that we would traditionally use to know whether or not Wolverine's telling the truth, they're not part of this equation. So honestly, this could go either way. And with Wolverine existing for the purpose of destroying what's left of the X-Men, it's the perfect opportunity for him to pull it off. So I leave it to you guys. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he playing possum or is he serious? I want to know what your thoughts are. Pretty short video today, but with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.